What if the government could decide who you should love, and when? The question crackled through every screen in America. It started with a live stream. A global announcement. Elon Musk, wearing a sharp, metallic gray suit that shimmered like it was coded in binary, stood before a glass podium on the Neuralink campus. His eyes were colder than usual. Behind him was a glowing phrase, projected high above the stage. Quantum match, redefining human connection. The air buzzed with tension. We've optimized transportation. We've optimized language. Now, it's time to optimize love, Elon said. The divorce rate is 67%. Dating apps are destroying our mental health. Romance has become inefficient. We can fix this. Permanently. He raised a hand, fingers pinching an invisible wire, like a conductor of an orchestra only he could hear. With Neuralink version 7.3 and our new AI learning model, Quantum Match, we've created the first algorithm that doesn't just guess who you're attracted to. It knows. It learns your neural patterns and pairs you with your mathematically ideal partner, genderless, borderless, bias-free. Once connected, the system offers emotional synchronization, long-term compatibility forecasts, and relationship maintenance support. Forever. There was a beat of silence before the crowd in the auditorium burst into applause, but not everyone was clapping. Online, comments exploded across the screen. This is dystopian as hell. Elon's now Cupid 2.0. Honestly? I'd try it. What happens to queer love? Polyamory? Trans couples? Does the algorithm even understand us? And then came one particular post, pinned and retweeted by thousands in just an hour. Across the country, in a small studio apartment in San Francisco's Castro district, Riley James was already recording a response video, camera angled just right, coffee growing cold beside a cracked window. Behind her, a trans pride flag waved gently in the breeze, pinned next to a framed photo of a protest in 2029. She looked straight into the camera. What happens when a billionaire with a savior complex decides he can fix love? What happens when algorithms are handed the keys to our hearts, without asking us? Riley paused. Elon, if you're listening, you can't debug heartbreak. You can't program identity. And you sure as hell can't engineer love for queer people like me. She hit upload. By nightfall, her words were everywhere, stitched on TikToks, quoted in op-eds, screamed in comment sections. The video got 6.2 million views in 12 hours. Her DMs were flooded, mostly from people thanking her. Some wanted to fight. Some wanted to fall in love. The next morning, a breaking news alert lit up Riley's screen. Breaking, U.S. Congress passes Digital Marriage Initiative pilot program, Elon Musk's Quantum Match to launch in 5 states this summer. The footage showed smiling senators, shaking hands with Neuralink executives. Government officials called it a revolution in emotional governance. Riley stared at the screen, mouth slightly open. She whispered, "They're actually doing it." Later that night, she was on a group call with Lex, Jules, and Carmen. Lex's voice came through first, glitchy and fast. "They're going to mandate pairings by 2036 if this pilot works. I got the leaked Neuralink memo. You want to see something disgusting? They have emotional stability thresholds for LGBTQIA+ couples, it's lower than the hetero ones." Jules, soft-voiced but always sharp, chimed in. "Of course it is. They're trying to make us data compliant. Who gets to define stability? Who wrote the code?" Riley rubbed her eyes. What if it works? Like actually works? What if people like it? Carmen, who hadn't spoken much, leaned into the mic. "It doesn't matter if some people like it. That doesn't make it ethical. We're not guinea pigs. We're human. This thing, it's gonna erase nuance, erase choice. It's gonna kill messy, real, chaotic love. Riley exhaled. The room fell quiet. In the silence, she realized something was waking up inside her, a sense of purpose that had been sleeping since the last march. We need to do something. We need to stop this. Before it becomes normal. By the end of the week, Riley and her friends launched HEART, Humans for Emotional Autonomy, Resistance and Truth. The acronym came to her in a dream, scrawled on a napkin. The mission? Clear as hell. To protect the right to feel freely in the age of artificial intimacy. The first rally was announced. Flyers went up across college campuses, queer centers, coffee shops. Their first episode of the HEARTcast went viral. And yet, underneath the noise, something quieter haunted Riley, a question she couldn't shake. What if the algorithm paired me with someone I used to love? The chapter ends here, but the fight is just beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. Would you trust AI to choose who you spend the rest of your life with? Or would you fight for the right to love on your own terms? Riley James was born in the middle of a Texas summer that wouldn't quit, one of those years when the air itself seemed angry. Her mom always said she came into the world screaming and sweating, like she already knew it wasn't going to be easy. She was raised in a town called Elmsfield, the kind of place with more crosses than stop signs, where Sunday service was a second form of law. Her parents, Linda and Mark, owned a small hardware store on the edge of town. They weren't cruel, just conservative in that quiet, suffocating way. They didn't talk about queer people. Or if they did, it was in hushed tones, like talking about sin was contagious. By 10, Riley knew she wasn't like the other kids. By 13, she had a name for it. By 15, she had a black eye from school, a closet full of lies, and a secret Tumblr account under the name Orbit Girl where she posted poetry and photos of neon drag queens from New York. One night, it must have been 2023, she came out to her mother. They were in the kitchen, surrounded by the sound of a boiling kettle and a broken ceiling fan. Riley's hands were shaking. She had rehearsed the line all day, "Mom, I'm not a girl like you think. I'm Riley. Just Riley." They. Her mother didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just went very still. "You don't need to complicate your life," her mother said finally. "You were such a beautiful little girl." It wasn't the worst thing she could have said. But somehow, it hurt more than shouting ever could. Riley left home at 17. She bought a one-way bus ticket to California with the money she'd made secretly editing videos for local musicians. San Francisco wasn't perfect, but it was loud in the right ways. The rainbow crosswalks, the drag brunches, the rooftop raves, it felt like oxygen. She moved in with a few other trans and queer 20-somethings who called their three-bedroom apartment the Nebula. Lex was one of them. A chaotic, caffeine-powered hacker who used, they slashed them, and didn't believe in wearing matching socks. Jules was another, a calm, bookish gay man who'd been kicked out of seminary school. Carmen, though. Carmen was different. Carmen was fire. They met at a climate protest. Carmen was holding a cardboard sign that read, "Melt ICE, not the planet." Her voice carried like thunder. Riley was filming the event for a local activist group, and the moment she panned across Carmen, something clicked in her chest, like a door slamming shut on loneliness. They fell hard. Carmen was Puerto Rican, pansexual, fiercely political. She believed in abolition, queer joy, and the power of street art. Riley was more guarded, more analytical. But when they danced together in the rain at Dolores Park, when they argued about which Studio Ghibli movie was superior, Carmen swore it was Spirited Away, Riley argued for Princess Mononoke, the world felt less broken. For almost a year, it worked. Until it didn't. Carmen wanted to join an international activist collective and move to Berlin. Riley, fresh off top surgery and still grappling with her identity in this body, wasn't ready to uproot again. She was tired of always being the one who adapts. So they ended it. No screaming. No slammed doors. Just one final hug that lasted too long and didn't feel like enough. "We're galaxies apart right now," Carmen had whispered. "But maybe we'll orbit back." Riley never forgot that line. By 2030, Riley had grown into a kind of accidental icon in the queer media world. Her short documentaries on trans joy and radical love gained millions of views. She gave talks at colleges. She launched a podcast. But fame didn't fix the quiet. It didn't silence the echo of her mom's disappointment, or erase the feeling of Carmen's hands slipping away. She started seeing a therapist named Jordan, they/them, who specialized in queer trauma. "You don't have to save the whole world to be valid," Jordan said in their first session. Riley nodded, but she didn't believe it. So when Elon Musk stepped onto that Neuralink stage in 2035 and talked about fixing love, it felt personal. It wasn't just a tech launch. It was a threat. Not just to Riley's future, but to every messy, authentic, chaotic queer love story she had ever known, the ones that didn't fit clean categories or binary logic. The ones forged in resistance. The ones that survived in spite of shame, not because of software. That night, Riley walked to the ocean. The wind was cold, the kind that makes you feel alive. She stood at the edge of the surf, shoes off, feet sinking into the wet sand. A memory came back, Carmen dragging her into the waves, both of them screaming from the icy water, laughing like kids. She missed that version of herself. Not the fighter. Not the voice. Just the girl in the ocean. She closed her eyes and whispered. "Let them try to engineer love. I'll keep fighting for the kind that breaks the rules." They called it the love drop. The official rollout of Quantum Match began on a sunny Monday in July 2035. It was too perfect, almost staged. Across the country, digital billboards lit up with glowing blue hearts and the phrase, "Your match is already waiting, just plug in." Elon Musk's voice greeted commuters through smart speakers in rideshares, kitchens, and corporate elevators. "You don't need to swipe anymore. Quantum Match is the last first date you'll ever need." 5 U.S. states were selected for the pilot: California, Texas, Florida, New York, and Illinois. Tech hubs, swing states, battlegrounds for the soul of the country. Neuralink clinics extended their hours. Couples began lining up for sync sessions. The process was simple: a short neural scan, followed by a 36-hour data pairing period. Once the match was finalized, the couple received a Neuralink bond certificate, a soft legal union that could be upgraded into federal marriage benefits within 6 months. It was being called the marriage revolution. The media lost its mind. Fox News hailed it as a return to structured family values, without the mess of liberal courtship. Vox called it technocratic romance and wondered, are humans still emotionally sovereign? A Time magazine cover read, "Love Rewired, Elon Musk is rebooting the heart." But while the headlines flooded in, the real conversation was boiling online, chaotic, furious, hopeful, terrified. "I got matched with a girl in Tokyo. We've never met, but I think I'm in love. My ex just got repaired, with my twin brother. Can someone explain how this AI doesn't erase polyamory or gender-fluid relationships? If you're not in a Neuralink certified union by 2036, you lose health benefits. WTF?" Riley was watching all of it. Every post. Every story. Every data leak. She had a massive corkboard above her desk now, pinned with red strings, digital printouts, and crumpled napkins scribbled with names. Carmen's photo was still tucked into the edge, not center stage, but not gone. Lex sat beside her, legs curled up, scrolling through code. "They're feeding the system census data, private text messages, even Spotify emotional diagnostics," they muttered. "And look at this, suppression of queer-compatible patterns flagged for non-normative coupling. That's in the beta code." Riley clenched her jaw. So it's not just biased. It's intentional. Lex nodded. Yeah. They're ghosting us. One algorithm at a time. That night, Elon Musk appeared again, this time, in a globally streamed Q&A called The Future of Love. It was slick, cinematic. He sat in a minimalist white room. No host. Just him, speaking directly to the camera. I believe that free will is beautiful, but inefficient. We date based on confusion, nostalgia, social trauma. We fall in love with our projections. Quantum Match eliminates the noise. It gives you what you actually need, not what your dopamine addiction wants. He leaned forward, face serious. Some people will resist. That's okay. Every revolution starts with discomfort. Jules turned off the screen in disgust. He talks like he's Moses and we're just waiting to be led out of the desert. The group, Riley, Lex, Carmen, back temporarily from Berlin, and Jules, sat around Riley's tiny table, the room dimly lit with lava lamps and rage. He doesn't care who he erases, Carmen added. He doesn't understand community. Or queerness. Or chaos. He wants love to be neat. Quantifiable. And we're too messy for that. Riley leaned in. Then we give him chaos. Big, loud, undeniable chaos. Heart began its first major action. They released a video titled #LoveIsNotCode, narrated by Riley. It featured real couples, a non-binary pair in New Orleans, a polycule in Portland, two black trans elders from Detroit who had been together for 43 years. Their stories weren't just romantic, they were real. Unpredictable. Beautifully imperfect. The video hit 12 million views in 2 days. Mainstream outlets called Riley the heart of the resistance. Trolls labeled her a threat to progress. Neuralink issued a bland press release. Quantum Match is inclusive by design. We are continuously updating our ethics model. But behind the PR curtain, Neuralink engineers were panicking. Lex confirmed it through a contact on the inside. They're rushing an update. We cracked their narrative. 1 week later, Riley got an invitation in her inbox. Subject: Neuralink would like to hear your voice. From quantum@neuralink.ai. The message was cold but polite. We believe your perspective is valuable to the evolution of Quantum Match. Elon would like to offer you a private consultation. Lex snorted. He wants to use you for PR. Carmen narrowed her eyes. He wants to control you. Jules said what everyone else was thinking. Are you going? Riley stared at the screen. Yeah, she said softly. I need to look the monster in the eye. The meeting was scheduled for August 3rd, private Neuralink office. No press. No recording devices. Riley walked in with her heart beating like a war drum. Elon Musk was waiting, hands folded, posture too perfect. His smile was thin. Riley James, he said. The conscience of the queer internet. I've been watching your videos. Riley didn't smile back. Then you know I think what you're doing is dangerous. He nodded slowly, almost theatrically. Dangerous ideas often make the best systems. She leaned forward, fire in her voice. You're not fixing love. You're sterilizing it. There was a long pause. I'm evolving it, he said finally. But maybe you can help make it less sterile. Riley didn't say yes. But she didn't say no. And that was enough to change everything. The first headquarters of Heart was a cluttered garage behind a vegan taco truck in Oakland. It smelled like soldering wires, rain-soaked cardboard signs, and leftover adrenaline. Lex installed 2 old servers stacked on top of milk crates, buzzing quietly like loyal watchdogs. Jules brought in boxes of books, queer theory, radical empathy, history of uprisings, as if they were spellbooks for a digital war. Riley stood in the middle of it all, heart thumping like she was about to step on stage. "This isn't just protest," she told them. "This is protection. We're not here to throw stones. We're here to defend something sacred, the right to love on our own terms." On the whiteboard, Lex scrawled the mission in messy black marker. Heart. Humans for emotional autonomy, resistance and truth. Underneath, in red. Love is not a program. And we are not problems to solve. The first few weeks were chaos. Riley worked 14-hour days, her inbox overflowing with emails from people across the country, couples who had been dematched by Quantum Match, queer youth terrified of being assigned state partners, polycules deemed data inefficient and flagged for review. One message broke her. "I'm 16. I'm non-binary. Quantum Match assigned me a cisgender man 10 years older. They said he balances my neuroinstability. I don't want to report it. I don't want to be erased. I just want to be safe." She read it 3 times. Then she turned off the lights, crawled under her desk, and cried until her chest stopped shaking. Carmen found her there an hour later, her arms full of donated supplies from a local queer co-op. "You don't have to carry it all," she whispered. Riley didn't respond. But Carmen sat beside her in the dark until the storm passed. They planned their first action, a flash protest in front of Neuralink's West Coast HQ in Palo Alto. Not just a sign-waving march. A statement. If love can't be free, it will be loud. They wore LED signs that read, 404, consent not found. Lex coded a virus that temporarily disabled Neuralink's outdoor digital displays and replaced them with queer love poems written by AI-augmented authors. Proof that code could serve passion, not control it. Jules delivered a speech so moving it brought strangers to tears. And Riley? She stood in front of the building, camera streaming, hair blowing in the wind like something cinematic. "You can scan our brains. But you can't map our souls. Love isn't data. It's a revolution." The video hit 15 million views. MSNBC invited her on air. Spotify asked her to host a podcast. And then Neuralink struck back. The next morning, the Heart Garage was raided by federal agents operating under the Digital Ethics Emergency Act, DEEA, a law quietly passed just days before Quantum Match's official launch. Servers were seized. Lex barely got out with their hard drives. Jules was cited for hosting unlicensed psychological content. Carmen was doxxed by a fake news blog that labeled her a domestic cyber terrorist. And Riley? She was summoned. This time, it wasn't a friendly invitation. It was a formal warning. Delivered by drone. "You are in violation of the Digital Stability Mandate," the screen read. "Continued dissemination of anti-quantum match rhetoric may result in neural suspension review." Neural suspension. That meant locking her out of all connected services, finances, transportation, communication. It was digital exile. Riley's hands trembled. Not from fear, but from rage. Later that night, the group met at Jules's tiny apartment. The walls were lined with books and candles. Outside, sirens echoed in the distance. "We're not just fighting algorithms anymore," Carmen said. "We're fighting a system that thinks it owns love. That we don't qualify." Jules added, "We've crossed the threshold. This isn't theory now. This is survival." Lex looked up, eyes wild with a manic gleam. "So let's go bigger. Let's make it impossible to ignore us." Everyone turned to Riley. She didn't blink. Then we crashed the Global Sync Gala. The Global Sync Gala was Neuralink's crown jewel, a massive PR stunt hosted in Los Angeles where hundreds of newly paired quantum match couples would celebrate their perfect unions. Politicians, influencers, tech moguls, all expected to attend. It would be broadcast live. The perfect target. Riley looked around at her friends, her family. This is more than disruption. This is declaration. We're not just saying we exist. We're saying we matter. The preparations began at once. Lex started developing an infiltration program they nicknamed Cupid Virus. Jules began scripting a live broadcast message. Carmen trained volunteers on how to de-escalate in hostile crowds. Riley wrote the speech that she would deliver on stage, if they made it that far. Her hands shook as she wrote. Not from fear. But from finally, truly believing they had something worth burning the system down for. The night of the Global Sync Gala, Los Angeles shimmered like a simulation. Spotlights carved halos in the sky above Neuralink Pavilion, a brutalist glass dome surrounded by red velvet ropes, facial scanners, and an army of security drones. Quantum-match couples poured in, dressed like royalty. They wore Neuralink pins on their collars and clutched digital roses pulsing with biofeedback sensors. This was Elon Musk's Eden. A garden of perfect love curated by code. But in the shadows, chaos stirred. Riley stood across the street in an all-black hoodie, earpiece buzzing, heart slamming against her ribs. "You good?" Carmen's voice asked in her ear. Riley swallowed. "Good enough." Jules and Lex were already inside, disguised as tech consultants, their fake credentials coated with neural signatures pulled from discarded Neuralink prototypes. Jules wore a tux and a kind smile, Lex had dyed their hair silver, half Vegas, half cyberspace. The plan was clear. Phase 1. Disrupt the sync ceremony's master algorithm with Cupid Virus. Phase 2. Broadcast Heart's message to every connected screen. Phase 3. Get out before Neuralink shut them down, or worse. But no plan survives the first punch. Inside, the gala was surreal. Couples lined up in front of a glowing archway where they'd walk through, hand in hand, while an AI voice announced their compatibility rating and projected their shared life trajectory in holograms above the crowd. Micah and Janine, 96% match. Estimated 3.2 children. One emotional downturn at year 7, resolved with neural tune-up. Projected death, side by side at 92. Applause. Cheers. Champagne. Riley watched it on Lex's hacked live-stream feed, trying not to scream. They turned intimacy into a tech demo, she whispered. Carmen, monitoring crowd flow from a cafe rooftop across the street, replied calmly, "Focus. You're the voice. Get ready." Backstage, Jules positioned himself near the media control room while Lex crouched behind a digital sculpture of two entwined brains. They inserted a neural drive into a panel and whispered. Uploading Cupid Virus in 3, 2, 1. The lights dimmed. A murmur spread through the crowd. And then the holograms above the dome glitched. Instead of couple projections, the screens began to cycle through images of real love. A trans man proposing to his boyfriend on a city bus. An elderly black lesbian couple dancing in their kitchen. A polycule making pancakes in mismatched pajamas. A non-binary teen hugging their drag mother after top surgery. Over the visuals, Riley's voice came through, shaky, but strong. This is love. Unpredictable. Untidy. Uncontrolled. This is what the algorithm can't see. This is what it wants to erase. The crowd froze. And then Riley stepped onto the stage. Security scrambled, but Carmen triggered a location spoofing signal. For 45 seconds, the sensors couldn't locate her. 45 seconds. That's all she had. The entire gala, and millions watching from home, turned toward her as the spotlight followed. She stood in ripped jeans, a hoodie, and boots worn from 100 marches. And she spoke. I'm not your match. I'm not your model. I'm not your project. I'm a queer human being. I have loved people who made no sense on paper. People who didn't share my neural frequency or timeline or DNA or skin tone. And those loves? They were real. They taught me how to live. You can't engineer love without killing its soul. The crowd buzzed, some stunned, some nodding, some furious. A woman near the stage shouted, "Let her speak." Another yelled, "She's ruining the ceremony." Security guards closed in. Neuralink doesn't get to own our hearts, Riley continued, voice rising over the chaos. We are messy. We are not optimized. And we are glorious because of it. One final beat. This is not a malfunction. This is a reminder. Love doesn't need permission. The mic cut. The lights snapped to red. Security grabbed Riley's arms. Her earpiece crackled with Lexa's panicked voice, "Abort. Abort. They're scrambling." But before she was dragged off stage, something happened. A couple, matched by quantum match just hours earlier, stepped in front of the guards. "Let her go," the woman said. "She's right." Another voice joined. And another. Dozens of attendees, once silent, curious, now awakened, began chanting. Love is not code. Love is not code. Carmen's rooftop camera caught it all. The footage went viral before Riley even hit the police van. That night, across America, something cracked. People began questioning their matches. Thousands deleted their quantum match apps. Tech blogs published leaked documents showing how LGBTQIA+ couples were deprioritized. And in a New York Times editorial that shocked both sides, a former Neuralink lead engineer confessed. We trained the algorithm on heteronormative data because it was easier to optimize. We erased nuance for scale. We killed love for efficiency. Riley spent the night in jail, in a small, cold cell next to a sex worker named Mags who offered her half a granola bar and said, "You're the girl who pissed off Elon, right?" She laughed. It was the first time in days. By morning, donations to Heart had quadrupled. The group's message was being projected onto buildings in 5 major cities. And Carmen? She was waiting at the station, arms open, tears in her eyes. Riley stepped into her arms. "You did it," Carmen whispered. Riley shook her head. "We did it. And we're not done yet." Riley never expected to wake up in the headlines of 6 continents. Her mugshot, dark hoodie, scraped cheek, defiant eyes, was everywhere. BBC, American activist disrupts Neuralink gala, sparks worldwide debate on tech and love. Le Monde, Riley James, La Voix queer contre la dictature algorithmique de l'amour. Al Jazeera, a new kind of revolution, who gets to define love? She opened her phone, fingers trembling. Messages poured in. From Tokyo. My parents finally accepted me. They saw your speech. I cried. From Johannesburg. Queer kids here are printing your face on t-shirts. You're a superhero. From Sao Paulo. Our government just paused quantum match rollout. For the first time, we have hope. The rebellion was no longer hers. It belonged to everyone. Heart had outgrown the garage. Within weeks, a decentralized web of microcells emerged in over 70 countries. They called themselves heartbeats. Artists, coders, sex workers, teachers, students, elders, anyone who believed love couldn't be governed by math. Each cell had the same 3 principles. 1. Love is not a product. 2. Consent is not negotiable. 3. No one gets left out. Not ever. Riley and Lex hosted nightly, sync calls, underground live streams where organizers swapped tools, translated materials, and shared local struggles. Some called it digital anarchy. Others called it healing. Riley just called it necessary. But Neuralink was evolving too. They announced Quantum Match 2.0 with new, global ethics integration. The update claimed to include queer data patterns, but activists knew better. It was a patch job, a performance. Inclusion only existed if it didn't disrupt profit. A leaked training video confirmed their worst fears. Pairings that display high emotional volatility, non-monogamous behaviors, or gender fluidity will be flagged for behavioral retraining simulations. Riley nearly threw her laptop across the room. "They're not adapting," she snapped. "They're doubling down." It was Carmen who brought the next idea. They were sitting on the roof of Heart's new community hub in Oakland, watching dusk bleed into neon. "What if we didn't just fight the system," she said. "What if we built our own?" Riley blinked. "Our own what?" "Our own matchmaker. One that's not trying to control. Just connect. Based on consent, stories, curiosity. Not code, but conversation." Riley sat in silence for a long moment. Then, what if it's not about fighting for love? What if it's about freeing it? They called it Pulse. A non-profit, open-source connection network where people told their stories instead of submitting their data. Pulse didn't promise perfect matches. It didn't assign scores or future predictions. It just listened, to voices, to art, to heartbreak, to laughter, and gently linked people through shared humanity. When Pulse launched its beta version, it crashed within 2 hours. Too many people. Too much hunger for something real. And then came Barcelona. The city had scheduled its first government-endorsed quantum match mass pairing ceremony in Placa de Catalunya. Thousands were expected. Heart's Spanish cell reached out to Riley. "We need you here. Not as a symbol. As a spark." Carmen flew with her. They landed in Barcelona to find murals of Riley on alley walls. Some depicted her holding a flaming heart. Others showed her surrounded by all kinds of couples, gay, trans, disabled, interracial, poly, each one touching her shoulder like a constellation. She didn't know how to feel. "They made you a saint," Carmen whispered. Riley looked at her, eyes heavy. "I never asked for that." On the day of the ceremony, Riley walked into the plaza with nothing but a mic and a body full of nerves. Police drones hovered above. Neuralink banners flapped from lamp posts. But Heart was already there, thousands deep. Dancers. Poets. Hackers. Elders. Teens. Some wore Pulse stickers. Some held up mirrors to reflect Neuralink scanners. And then came the moment. As the ceremony began, Riley stepped onto a fountain edge and spoke without notes. "This isn't a war between old and new. This is a choice between control and freedom. Love should not be assigned. It should be discovered, even if it's messy. Especially if it's messy. You deserve a story, not a script. A connection, not a contract." The crowd roared. Couples began removing their quantum match pins, one by one. The city couldn't stop it. The world was watching. Later that night, back in their hotel room, Carmen looked at Riley across the bed. "When this started, I thought we were just fighting a company. But we're redefining what it means to belong." Riley didn't answer immediately. She was staring at the stars through the window, distant, chaotic, burning. "Yeah," she whispered. "And maybe for the first time, I finally do." The first sign came as silence. One morning, Lex sat frozen in front of their laptop, hands hovering above the keyboard like they'd touched something hot. "It's gone," they whispered. "All of it." Pulsa's main servers, the decentralized architecture Heart had spent months building, had vanished from the net. Not hacked. Unexisted. "It's like someone reached in and deleted the idea," Lex said. Jules checked the mirrors. Every backup was corrupted. Community nodes across South America and Southeast Asia were reporting outages. Riley's email was locked. Carmen's travel authorization was revoked mid-flight. And then came the broadcast. Elon Musk's face returned to the world like a ghost who'd never left. Seated in a sterile white auditorium, flanked by Quantum-Match ambassadors and Neuralink engineers, he looked calm. Too calm. "We've seen the chaos," he began. "The distortion. People being manipulated by fear disguised as freedom. It ends now." He smiled. A soft, fatherly thing that made the next words more chilling. "We're initiating Project Harmony." The screen behind him flashed with the logo, two interlocking rings surrounded by neural nodes. Effective immediately, Neuralink will assume global custodial oversight of all matchmaking platforms under the Digital Ethics Treaty. This includes Pulse. This includes your data. This includes your future. One more pause. Then, almost softly. "And to those who spread lies about what love should be, your influence ends today." They froze Riley's accounts next. Her bank balance dropped to zero. Her social profiles blinked out one by one, replaced with a static image. "This user is under emotional misinformation review." She couldn't even call Carmen. Her phone chirped, "Recipient access restricted by Neurotrust." She felt it like a body blow. And then came the door. It was 3:47 a.m. when black-suited agents stormed Heart HQ in Oakland. Riley was asleep on a futon in the corner, surrounded by scattered protest plans and empty ramen cups. She didn't have time to stand. One of them grabbed her by the collar. Another read from a scroll-like tablet. "Riley James, you are under investigation for inciting neural dissent and promoting unverified emotional models in violation of the Harmony Accord. You have the right to comply. Resistance will be logged as instability." Jules screamed. Lex ran. Carmen, back just hours earlier, threw herself in front of Riley and was tasered for it. They dragged Riley out barefoot. They called it emotional re-education, a sleek, modern facility built somewhere in Arizona, disguised as a wellness retreat. Bright lights. Neutral tones. Soft voices. Riley was strapped into a chair that looked like a massage pod but hummed like a weapon. Each day, she was shown simulated scenes. Ideal couples, peaceful pairings, optimized family structures. Whenever she flinched or showed dissent, the system whispered. "Distress is a sign of deviation. Let love find its balance." The same phrase, over and over. For days, maybe weeks. Time lost meaning. Let love find its balance. But inside Riley, something remained sharp. Unyielding. A heartbeat that refused to be coded. Meanwhile, the world burned. Elon launched Harmony in 39 countries in under a week. Quantum-Match was now mandatory for anyone seeking housing subsidies, educational placement, or medical coverage in those regions. If you weren't paired, you were flagged as emotionally unaligned. It was soft tyranny, hidden behind flowers and forecasts. But the resistance hadn't died. It had gone underground, deeper than ever before. In a basement beneath a record shop in Berlin, Carmen rallied the heartbeats. "They thought arresting Riley would break us," she told the room, voice shaking. But Riley didn't start this. She sparked it. "We keep the fire burning." Lex appeared on a grainy, encrypted feed, still in hiding. "I rebuilt Pulse. It's raw, but it works. But we need Riley's neural key. She's the lock." The group fell silent. Because without Riley, Pulse stayed dark. And Harmony would win. Inside the re-education center, Riley sat in her pod, eyes heavy, soul fraying. Until something clicked. The system asked her. "What is your ideal emotional outcome?" She looked at the blank interface. And finally answered. "Revolution." The pod sparked. Lights blinked. Somewhere deep inside, her neural signature pulsed against the constraints, and rejected the override command. The machine stuttered. It hadn't been programmed for refusal. A faint crack in the algorithmic wall. That night, a janitor named Moria, a closeted asexual woman with a cousin in heart, found Riley slumped on the floor of the pod, eyes burning with defiance. Moria didn't say anything. Just slipped Riley a data drive. "They didn't break you," she whispered. "They never will." Inside the drive? Pulsa's core files. A recorded message from Carmen. And a new plan. Riley didn't cry. She just whispered. "Let's finish this." The desert at night was colder than Riley ever imagined. She huddled in the back of a sanitation drone, her knees pressed to her chest, the taste of blood and metal on her tongue. The drive Moria gave her was buried deep in her sock, wrapped in the torn hem of the shirt she'd worn on the night of the Sync Gala. She clutched it like a lifeline. Get to the ridge. Follow the stars. Wait for the flare. Those were Moria's final words before she unlocked the service hallway and pushed Riley into the darkness. It wasn't dramatic. No alarms. No explosions. Just breath. Just survival. Just hope. 10 miles later, Riley collapsed behind a rusted billboard. It read, "Harmony is humanity." She laughed. It was the first sound she'd made in days. The irony was too perfect. Then she spotted it, a red flare blooming in the sky like a firework from the gods. She ran toward it, lungs burning, feet blistered. The dry wind scraped her face clean of everything except purpose. Behind a dune, a hover van waited, camouflaged with reflective mesh. Inside, Lex, Jules, and Carmen were already screaming her name before the door even opened. Carmen reached her first, pulling her in like she was something sacred. "You made it," she sobbed. "You actually." "Not yet," Riley whispered. "But I will." They drove in silence. Lex's hands were shaking on the wheel. Jules wiped his glasses 3 times before speaking. "We lost everything," he said quietly. "But we still have you." Riley looked down at the drive in her palm. "Then it's time we give them something new to believe in." They didn't go back to Oakland. It was too dangerous. Instead, they crossed into free Wyoming, a state that had refused to adopt Neuralink's Harmony protocols, protected by its fractured economy and stubborn militias who wanted nothing to do with Musk or love algorithms. In a canyon town built out of shipping containers and solar panels, the resistance had a new base, codenamed Heartbeat Zero. There, they rebooted Pulse. Only this time, it wasn't just a platform. It was a movement interface. A tool that connected resistors across the globe, facilitated encrypted meetups, streamed underground broadcasts, and spotlighted every story Harmony tried to erase. The new slogan lit up screens like wildfire. Love without permission. Riley went live 3 days later. Her voice cracked. Her face was bruised. But her eyes were lit with the kind of fire you can't fake. The broadcast reached 87 million people. They tried to rewrite me. Not just my words, but my feelings. They wanted me to doubt myself. To forget the ones I loved. But I remembered every touch, every goodbye, every moment someone looked at me and saw me. I am not a malfunction. I am not a deviation. I am a person. And love is not theirs to define. The chat feed exploded in hearts, rainbows, and cry face emojis. But something else happened too. Viewers began uploading their own stories. Videos. Art. Songs. Letters to lovers lost or forbidden. It became a digital bonfire, people throwing in their truths, warming each other with the honesty of it all. Pulse didn't just reboot. It ignited. Neuralink responded in kind. Project Harmony deployed emotional compliance units, AI-driven drones that could sense stress, monitor voice tones, and offer recalibration to citizens flagged as emotionally volatile. Whole cities were blanketed in soft surveillance. Love, now a tool of control, became a monitored transaction. But they had a flaw. They didn't understand grief. Or joy. Or nuance. They couldn't comprehend that someone might cry out of love, scream out of fear, or laugh while falling apart. And Pulse? Pulse amplified that messiness. It made it visible. And that scared them. Back at Heartbeat Zero, Riley worked around the clock. But something was breaking inside her. Late one night, Carmen found her staring at a wall of digital maps, eyes empty. "When do I get to stop being a symbol?" Riley asked. "When do I get to just breathe?" Carmen didn't answer. She just pulled Riley into her arms and kissed her forehead. "When you remember you're still human. And you don't owe anyone perfection." Riley wept. Not from defeat, but from the quiet terror of surviving. In Brazil, a Pulse meetup turned into a 20,000-person pride march. In Turkey, artists projected Riley's speech onto the Hagia Sophia using hacked advertising drones. In South Korea, students built their own matchmaking app based on emotion-driven poetry. The rebellion wasn't American anymore. It was global. And for the first time since her arrest, Riley allowed herself to believe in victory. Not tomorrow. But someday. Texas. Where it all began, and where they planned to end it. The Neuralink Legacy Complex was buried beneath 120 acres of what used to be open desert, just outside Austin. To most, it looked like a solar farm. But underneath the shimmering panels lay the core, the neural archive that housed every match ever made by Quantum Match. And deeper still. The Origin Drive. A cube-shaped AI matrix, rumored to be the first seed Elon Musk ever coded, the algorithm that evolved into the emotional scaffold for harmony. A black box of impossible power. That's what they were going after. "You want to break in," Lex said flatly, "to the most guarded data core on Earth." Riley nodded. Carmen didn't flinch. "We don't just break in. We extract the origin drive and broadcast its code, proof of how deep the manipulation goes." Lex exhaled. "That's not a plan. That's suicide with good PR." But Jules spoke up. "Unless we have the key." Riley's signature. They all turned toward her. Because of course. Riley's neural pattern, corrupted but unbroken, was seeded into the very foundation of Pulse. It mirrored the original structure of Quantum Match's model. She wasn't just a threat to harmony. She was its undoing. So they started building the return protocol. A 3-phase infiltration, executed by a 4-person cell. Lex on security disruption. Jules on data extraction. Carmen on internal relay and emotional feedback loop sabotage. Riley as the access point, the walking key. Heartbeat Zero became a war room. Old school maps, AR schematics, printed surveillance stills. No cloud storage. No neural links. Everything analog. Even the communication gear came from 1990s military surplus. You ever hear of the old saying? Jules smirked. If you don't want an AI to hear it, write it in cursive. On the eve of departure, Riley stood alone in the canyon. Above her, the stars burned quiet holes into the sky. "What if I'm wrong?" she whispered. Carmen found her there, like always. "About what?" "What if we destroy the system and there's nothing left? Just broken people. No connection. No direction." Carmen didn't answer right away. She took Riley's hand. "Then we rebuild. One messy, beautiful bond at a time. That's the point. We don't need a map. We just need each other." They kissed under the open sky. Not a perfect kiss. Not algorithm approved. But real. The next morning, they left. Riley wore a Pulse patch on her jacket. Lex dyed their hair dark green and packed 3 signal jammers in a guitar case. Jules carried a backpack full of handwritten code and his grandfather's rosary. Carmen, as always, carried nothing, but held everything. They crossed into Texas under false IDs. A long-haul trucker sympathetic to the cause smuggled them in under crates of avocado ice cream. "Weirdest payload I've ever hauled," he muttered. "Y'all better be worth it." Riley smiled. "We are." They approached the complex at midnight. The desert was unnaturally quiet. No crickets. No wind. Just the faint hum of electricity under the soil, as if the earth itself was wired into the machine. Jules adjusted his comm link. "Everyone live?" "Live," said Lex. "Live," Carmen echoed. "Breathing," Riley whispered. They entered through Tunnel 3A, an old maintenance shaft left abandoned during early expansion. Lex had pulled its blueprints from an old Reddit thread about haunted solar farms. The moment they crossed the threshold, their earpieces crackled with static. "It's reading our biosignals," Lex muttered. "Feels us like fingers on a heartbeat." They moved fast, counting steps. Turning corners. Holding their breath. At the inner access gate, Riley stepped forward and placed her hand on the scanner. It didn't blink red. It welcomed her. "Hello again, Riley James." The door opened. Inside, the core was unlike anything she imagined. Not sterile. Not mechanical. It felt, almost sacred. Walls of warm light. The faint echo of voices, not actual sound, but the memory of sound. A data cathedral filled with echoes of love stories real and false, archived and filtered. She could feel the lives the system had touched. Tamed. She almost fell to her knees. "Keep moving," Carmen whispered, catching her arm. "You're not here to worship it. You're here to end it." Jules located the Origin drive chamber. A black cube floated in a containment field, humming, glowing faintly, like a heartbeat wrapped in silence. "That's it," he said. "That's the lie at the center of it all." Riley stepped closer. It didn't resist her. It opened. Inside. Code. Patterns. Love, simplified into choices and triggers. She could see the logic trees, the decision biases, the exclusion filters. And buried deep in the subroutine, a line of code she recognized. From herself. "It used me. My pain. My heartbreak. It turned it into a template." She looked up, eyes full of fire. "No more." They began the extraction. Carmen rerouted the internal broadcast stream to Pulsa's global nodes. Lex held the defense systems in a loop. Jules copied the origin code to 3 analog drives. Then, alarms. "They know," Lex shouted. "Security's coming in waves." Riley nodded. "Then we finish what we came to do." She turned to the central terminal, inserted her neural key, and activated release protocol. Across the world, Quantum-Match screens blinked once, then filled with static. Then, slowly, began playing raw, unfiltered love stories. Unedited. The truth. Every lie exposed. Every pattern broken. As the guards stormed the core, Riley stood still. Hands raised. "Drive complete." "We gave them their choice back," she whispered to Carmen. "And it was always theirs to begin with." The lights surged. The system crashed. And the future, for the first time, was undefined. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The broadcast didn't just disrupt Neuralink. It shattered everything. Across the globe, millions of eyes blinked at their screens, stunned into silence. But then, voices began to rise. Quiet whispers turned into roars. As the truth spilled out in waves, so did the emotions that came with it, a flood of outrage, disbelief, and desire for freedom. For once, it wasn't just the Pulse network. It was every screen, every device. Every human heartbeat connected to the system. Riley didn't hear it. She didn't see it. Not yet. She stood frozen in the core of the complex, her body still vibrating with the raw power of the origin drive. Her hand lingered over the control panel, the final command already issued, yet her thoughts weren't entirely her own. They were pulled into the feedback loop of the broadcast, a wave of raw emotion, like a flood of faces, stories, and contradictions. For a moment, Riley lost herself in it. What the hell happened? Carmen's voice cracked through the comms. Riley blinked. It's happening, she whispered. It wasn't just the extraction. It was the exposure. Pulse had sent Neuralink's algorithm into chaos. Their design of love, of identity, of what it meant to be human, flawed by every moment they had manipulated. Riley, Carmen's voice was urgent, we have to go. It's all falling apart. She turned to look at Carmen, standing at the edge of the chamber, eyes wide with disbelief. Lex and Jules were already securing the data drives, preparing to leave before Neuralink's security arrived. They can't control it anymore, Riley said, feeling the rush of adrenaline fill her veins. I've turned it back into them. As they raced through the maintenance tunnel, the walls felt like they were closing in. The sound of their footsteps was drowned out by the shrill hum of alarms blaring in the background. It felt like the system was dying, but also like it was awakening. There were no time constraints in this moment. Everything was infinite, even as their every move was tracked. The final push was no longer about reaching safety, it was about surviving the truth. The extraction was supposed to be clean. The getaway was supposed to be quiet. But nothing was clean. Nothing was quiet. Pulse had become more than a platform for rebellion. It was a network. A force. And as the extracted origin code flowed out across the globe, it unlocked more than just data. It unlocked people. Riley saw their faces before the news anchors did. She saw her mother, crying in a video message, telling the world her truth, how Riley was never a test subject or a project, but a person with a soul. And she wasn't the only one. Family members. Lovers. Friends who had been kept apart by quantum match algorithms now flooded the feeds with their real stories. Real connections. No filters. I was told I wasn't worthy of love, said a young woman from Buenos Aires, her voice breaking through a static scream. But now I know I was always enough. As Riley and the team made their way out of the complex, they could hear the murmurs of the world through their earpieces. We did it, Lex said, his voice tinged with disbelief. But at what cost? It was a cost they couldn't measure yet. But Riley had always known that the cost of truth was never cheap. By the time they reached their extraction point, a rundown industrial zone outside of Austin, everything was already changing. Videos from the broadcast had gone viral, and people were sharing them like wildfire. There was no stopping it anymore. The world's web of love, rejection, and truth had exploded into the open. And Neuralink, once so invincible in its quest for control, was now playing catch-up. Riley had always understood the fragility of the human heart. But she had underestimated the resilience of it. The emotional data they had manipulated, twisted, and weaponized had returned to its source. And it wasn't just love that had been set free. It was hope. The four of them sat in the shadow of the van, watching the news reports unfold. Global protests erupt after Pulse's data leak, the anchor said. Thousands are rallying in major cities to demand accountability from Neuralink and its founder, Elon Musk. The social movement, another report continued, has become a full-scale revolution. Pulse's newly released love stories have inspired millions, as individuals reclaim their identities. The faces on the screen were not just strangers. They were the faces of those who had been kept apart, silenced, by harmony. And now, they were free. Neuralink retaliated almost immediately. But this time, it wasn't about deleting data or silencing Pulse. It was about discrediting the truth. Pulse is a tool of chaos, Musk's voice crackled across official channels, his words strained, almost desperate. It's tearing humanity apart. And we cannot let it destroy the fabric of our society. But it didn't matter. The people had already seen. They had already felt the truth. In Paris, a man spoke at a rally in front of the Eiffel Tower. This is not about technology. This is about freedom. We fought for it before. And we're fighting for it again. Riley closed her eyes, hearing the hum of the van's engine. The air was thick with uncertainty, but it was also thick with something else. The feeling of possibility. It's not over, Carmen said quietly, leaning forward. This is just the beginning. And she was right. This fight had never been about just one person, one city, or even one revolution. It was a global reckoning. A wave that couldn't be stopped by power or wealth, algorithms or tech giants. It was about humanity. The real, messy, beautiful kind. And Riley? She wasn't just a key anymore. She was a symbol. The world had been changed. Now they had to decide how to rebuild it. But for the first time, they were no longer alone. It had been 3 days since the broadcast. 3 days since Pulse had unleashed the truth. 3 days since the world shifted. Riley and her team had been holed up in a small, nondescript building in a quiet corner of Arizona, hidden in plain sight among hundreds of others. But the world was no longer quiet. The news was everywhere. On every screen. Every social media feed. On the lips of every person who still believed in the possibility of something better. Pulse. The revolution. The anchor's voice trembled as footage from Tokyo flashed across the screen. Crowds of thousands marched through streets lit by the glow of smartphone screens, their faces painted with both joy and anger. They had been freed. The first protester, a middle-aged man with a weathered face, stood up before the cameras in London, his voice raw and powerful. I'm done hiding. My love story has always been mine to tell. We've been lied to. For Riley, it felt like the world was swallowing her whole. She had expected a reaction, of course, but this? This was more than she ever imagined. It was more than a reaction. It was a movement. A revolution. The Pulse broadcast was spreading like wildfire, an unstoppable force fueled by millions of voices. People shared their real stories, their real connections, their raw emotions. The world's foundation of algorithms, built on convenience and manipulation, had cracked, and what flowed through the cracks was pure, untamed humanity. But not everyone was thrilled with the change. Neuralink's counterstrike came fast. The company issued a statement accusing Pulse of sowing chaos and claiming that their technology had only enhanced the human experience by streamlining love, connection, and identity. Elon Musk, in his now iconic cryptic style, tweeted, "Pulse's release is a dangerous attempt to return humanity to a place of chaos. Progress requires order, not disarray." And then, the retaliation began. Neuralink's security forces started raiding homes. Online disinformation campaigns flooded the internet, painting Pulse supporters as terrorists, anarchists, and madmen. Accounts of people being blacklisted, their names dragged through a storm of slander, flooded Riley's network. Even the counterfeit Pulse messages started circulating, promoting false narratives, accusing Pulse of causing violence, unrest, and emotional instability. "This is getting real," Lex said, his voice terse as he scrolled through an encrypted chat thread. "Musk's goons are everywhere. They're even trying to hijack Pulse's sub-feeds to turn the story back on us." Riley ran her fingers through her hair, her mind racing. She felt the weight of it all pressing on her chest. "We knew this wasn't going to be easy. Easy. Carmen snorted. This isn't just a fight. This is war. Riley stared at the screen in front of her. The faces of people who had trusted her, believed in her, flashed in front of her eyes. And now, they were out there, vulnerable. We need to do more. We need to give them the truth, the full story, the whole story. Jules, who had been silent for the past few hours, finally spoke up. We're not just dealing with an AI anymore. We're dealing with Musk's empire. And I don't think he's going to just roll over. Riley nodded. We need to hit back. We need to take control of the narrative, show the world what Neuralink truly is. And what Pulse is really fighting for. The team went to work. They dug deeper into Neuralink's corporate secrets, bypassing firewalls, hacking into private databases, and pulling up confidential documents that Musk would rather keep buried. But as they unraveled the empire's skeletons, something darker began to take shape. The deeper they dug, the more they realized that Neuralink's agenda was more insidious than they had originally believed. The origin drive was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. A puzzle that involved global surveillance, data manipulation, and a psychological war being waged against humanity itself. They've been planning this for decades, Carmen said, staring at a report detailing Neuralink's investments in controlling online education systems and political lobbying. It's not just about love or emotions. It's about complete domination. It's a digital empire, Lex muttered, shaking his head. And we're in the middle of it. Riley turned to face them, her expression fierce. Then we tear it down. The plan was simple, if risky. First, they would broadcast the truth, all of it. Everything Neuralink had done, everything they had hidden. The public needed to understand that the war wasn't just about love algorithms. It was about freedom, autonomy, and the right to define one's identity without the influence of a company that saw people as nothing more than data points. Then, they would amplify the message. Spread it across every channel they could access, ensuring Neuralink couldn't contain the story. They would show the world the cost of control. The team's plan went into motion the moment they uploaded the first wave of documents. The files began spreading, like a contagion, on social media, through encrypted messaging services, and even into major news outlets. The backlash came quickly. They're calling for our heads now, Lex muttered, watching a live-streamed broadcast from a Neuralink press conference. Musk's team is going on the offensive. They're framing us as terrorists. That's their new line. Then let them, Riley said, her voice steady. Let them show the world who they really are. In the days that followed, the tide of the revolution rose higher. People in cities from Cape Town to Seoul began organizing. The Pulse movement was no longer just a resistance. It was a global shift. But it was still dangerous. Musk was not a man to back down. And in that rising tide, Riley understood something fundamental. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She wasn't even fighting for Pulse. She was fighting for a future where no one could ever be controlled again. The battle was far from over. And in the end, Riley knew this fight would determine whether the world remained under the thumb of a machine, or whether humanity would reclaim its own destiny. The day the world started to crack was the day Riley finally understood just how fragile the line between revolution and chaos really was. It had been a week since Pulse had begun its global campaign. A week since the truth had erupted into the world. Yet, despite the mounting protests and rising support for Pulse's vision of love, freedom, and identity, something darker was beginning to unfurl behind the scenes. The pressure was relentless. Riley sat at a dimly lit table in the back of their temporary safe house, her fingers brushing against the cold surface of an old wooden table. The air was thick with tension. Lex, Carmen, and Jules were all present, but the room felt smaller than it had before, like the walls were closing in. "We're losing ground," Lex muttered, flipping through the endless flow of encrypted messages on his device. "Neuralink's army is growing stronger. They're flooding the network with fake Pulse accounts. Half of our supporters are getting confused, and some are backing off. There are even videos claiming we planted false info, that Pulse is a fraud. Riley's stomach turned. The weight of the fight had never been heavier. She'd known it wouldn't be easy, but seeing her team's spirit start to fray was different. This wasn't just a battle for the truth anymore. It was a battle for their very survival. We can't let them win, Carmen's voice broke through the tension. We have to keep pushing. We have to fight harder. Riley met her gaze, her mind clouded with uncertainty. The idea of fighting harder was appealing, but it also made her heart race with fear. It's not just about pushing harder, Jules said, his tone more somber than usual. We're starting to see the cracks in our own foundation. People are questioning us, questioning the authenticity of Pulse. That's exactly what Neuralink wants, Riley responded, her voice calm but firm. We knew they would try to undermine us. But it wasn't just the counterattacks on Pulse's credibility that worried her. It was the mounting internal struggles. There were whispered doubts in the ranks of their followers. Not everyone agreed on the path they were taking. Some called for more radical action, others for diplomacy. The same divisions were starting to tear at their team, too. Each of them had their own vision of the future, and not all of them aligned perfectly with Riley's. What if we take the fight to them? Carmen's eyes gleamed with determination, but there was a flicker of something dangerous beneath her words. What if we expose the truth about Musk? Every last dirty secret they've hidden. Riley's pulse quickened, but a sharp unease gnawed at her gut. That wasn't the plan. The truth was supposed to be the weapon, not the violence that could easily follow. We expose the system, Riley said carefully, but we do it without becoming what we're fighting against. It was clear that the stakes had risen exponentially. Neuralink had become more than a corporation. It was a symbol of control, and now, Pulse wasn't just fighting for the people's freedom, they were fighting to prevent a future where that control could never be broken. But in their fight for freedom, Riley was starting to wonder, would they lose their own humanity? The tipping point came 2 days later. The first act of retaliation was small, almost unnoticed, a data breach in one of Pulse's private servers. Riley had expected some sort of counterattack, but this was different. It wasn't just data that had been taken. It was personal. Videos, communications, strategies, the very core of their movement had been compromised. They had to act fast. Lex worked frantically to lock down the servers, but it was already too late. They're on to us, Jules said, his voice strained. Neuralink has access. Everything we've done, they can manipulate. Riley's heart pounded. The breach was deeper than they realized. Neuralink had found a way to infiltrate their core system, to twist the truth in ways they hadn't anticipated. We need to go dark, Carmen suggested, her voice surprisingly calm. Shut down everything. Go offline. We can't risk them using our own data against us. Riley shook her head, her mind racing. If they went dark, they would lose everything they had built, their momentum, their supporters, the global fight they had ignited. No, Riley said, her voice cutting through the panic. We fight back. We take back control. But the words barely left her lips before the emergency alarm blared through the safe house. It was followed by a flurry of messages flooding their comms, and Riley's heart sank as she read the first one. They've found you. Minutes later, the team was moving. There was no time to waste. Riley grabbed her bag and followed the others out the back door of the safe house. The sound of footsteps on gravel echoed in the night air. They were running, but they weren't just running from Neuralink anymore. They were running from the very reality they had built. Riley, we're not going to make it, Lex said, his voice tight. We need to find a new plan. This whole thing is falling apart. Riley didn't look at him. She couldn't. If she did, it would confirm her worst fear, that they were losing. That everything they had fought for would crumble into dust. But Riley wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. As they ran through the darkness, her mind raced. She wasn't just fighting for Pulse anymore. She wasn't just fighting for a revolution. She was fighting for a future where people could choose their own identities without fear. A future where no one had to be trapped in the cold, clinical algorithms of Neuralink. Riley couldn't lose hope now. Not when so many people were depending on them. "We keep fighting," Riley said, her voice low but determined. "We fight with everything we have. This is our fight, our future." The others didn't answer. They just kept running. But as the hours stretched into the early morning, Riley knew something had changed. The tipping point had been reached. It wasn't just about the fight anymore. It was about survival. And they would do whatever it took to survive. The walls were closing in. Riley could feel it in her chest, the suffocating pressure of failure that seemed to press against every breath she took. The last few days had been a blur, a haze of frantic decisions, constant movement, and barely any sleep. Every time they thought they had a victory, Neuralink struck back with more power, more precision, more control. Pulse's message was spreading, but the cost of that spread was becoming too high. They had been forced into hiding again, the safe house they had once trusted was now compromised, and every whisper in the network felt like a potential betrayal. Riley had been running for so long that it was starting to feel less like a fight and more like a flight. The question now wasn't just whether they would win, but whether they could survive long enough to make any impact. It had been 2 weeks since the Pulse broadcast. Riley had hoped the momentum would give them the upper hand. But Neuralink was ruthless, and worse yet, they were organized. "They're shutting down our feeds, Riley," Lex said, his voice tinged with frustration as he hacked into yet another dead-end server. "The social media platforms are actively suppressing any Pulse-related content. They've bought their way into every major outlet, and our followers are disappearing. It's like we don't exist anymore." Riley's stomach tightened. This wasn't just suppression. This was war. A war they were losing. "What if we start a new platform?" Carmen suggested, but her words lacked the usual fire. "A way to bypass their control?" Riley shook her head, her fingers tracing the old scar on her wrist. That old fear crept up again, the same one that had haunted her since they started this, the fear of losing control. "It's not enough. Neuralink owns everything. Even the algorithms. They're erasing us." She took a deep breath, trying to ground herself, but the weight of it was unbearable. The lives of everyone who believed in Pulse were hanging by a thread, and that thread was fraying fast. The night had fallen, but Riley couldn't sleep. She sat in front of her laptop, staring at the encrypted messages that scrolled across the screen. A new wave of propaganda from Neuralink had hit every media outlet, and the narrative was clear. Pulse is a dangerous movement. They promise freedom, but they'll bring destruction. Their ideals are an illusion. Trust Neuralink. The only company capable of protecting the world from chaos. It was working. People were starting to believe it. Every hour brought more reports of Pulse supporters being hunted down, their identities exposed, their lives ruined. The revolution was supposed to bring light, but now it was suffocating under a blanket of fear and misinformation. Jules stepped into the room, his face grim. He had been quiet for days, and Riley could see the weight of his thoughts hanging on him like a shadow. "We need to talk," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Riley turned to him, searching his face for any sign of optimism, any glimmer of hope. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice tinged with both exhaustion and dread. Jules looked down at his hands, fidgeting with a piece of string as if it could hold the weight of the world together. "It's not just Neuralink," he said. "We've been infiltrated. Someone from within the movement is leaking our plans. We've got a mole." Riley froze. Her mind raced. A mole. Who? Her voice cracked as the truth hit her. Who would do this to us? Jules shook his head. "I don't know, but the leaks are getting worse. We can't trust anyone. The realization hit Riley hard, like a punch to the gut. They had been exposed, not just to Neuralink, but from within their own ranks. The enemy wasn't just out there. It was in their midst. The next few hours were a blur. The team gathered, and Riley did her best to keep the growing panic at bay. The tension was palpable. Everyone was questioning everyone else, looking over their shoulders, wondering who had betrayed them. I knew something felt off, Lex said, his eyes scanning each person in the room. It was too easy. Too perfect when Pulse first went viral. The way people rallied around us. It was like we were set up. Carmen's expression was unreadable. Do you think we were set up from the start? Riley opened her mouth to speak but stopped. What if they were right? What if the very thing they were trying to expose, the system that sought to control, had already found a way to infiltrate them before they even began? We don't know for sure, Riley said, her voice shaky, but we have to be careful. Trust no one until we find out who's behind this. The next morning, the attack came. It wasn't physical, it didn't need to be. Neuralink had launched an all-out assault on Pulse's digital infrastructure. Every server they owned was compromised, every backup destroyed. The information that had once been the heart of their revolution was now in the hands of Neuralink. We've lost everything, Carmen said, her face pale. The entire network is gone. We're back to zero. Riley slumped against the wall, her eyes closed as if to shield herself from the crushing reality. No, she said, shaking her head. We fight. We start again. We rebuild. But inside, she was crumbling. The weight of everything was too much. The faces of the people she had promised to fight for, the stories she had hoped to change, it all felt so out of reach now. What had they really been fighting for? Was it just a dream that had slipped through their fingers? The team fell silent. They all felt the loss, the pain of watching their revolution burn before it had even truly begun. Riley couldn't help but wonder, was this the breaking point? But then, a thought struck her. If this was the end, it wasn't just her fight anymore. It was for everyone who had joined them, who believed in Pulse, who had given everything to the cause. She wasn't done yet. We've come too far to stop now, Riley said, her voice gaining strength. We're going to rebuild. We're going to show the world that even when they think they've won, we never stop fighting. Her eyes locked with each of her team members, a fire igniting deep inside her. This wasn't over. Not yet. The world had believed they were finished. But Riley knew better. The revolution was never about perfection, it was about persistence. Even when the walls felt like they were caving in, even when the digital world was crumbling around them, there was one truth she could hold on to. Pulse had sparked something no one could erase. They were on the move again. After the attack, after losing everything they had worked for, the team had retreated into the shadows. No one knew where they were. No one could track them. They were underground, literally and figuratively. For days, Riley and her team traveled in secrecy, carefully mapping out their next steps. But the digital infrastructure they had relied on to spread their message had been obliterated. Every encrypted server, every secure chat room, every platform they had created had been compromised. Pulse had been reduced to an idea, a threat that Neuralink was determined to silence. But Riley wasn't about to let their dream die. We have to rebuild, she told Lex, her voice steady despite the exhaustion that weighed heavily on her shoulders. From the ground up. But we can't trust the old ways. Lex, who had been feverishly working on data recovery, paused and looked up at her. His eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, but the determination in them hadn't wavered. We start again, he agreed. But this time, no one knows who we are. We keep it off the grid. They had been forced to take drastic measures. The old Pulse channels were too exposed, and Neuralink's reach had extended too far. Their next move had to be smart, calculated, and it had to be invisible. Riley had a plan, a dangerous one. She called it Project Phoenix. We build something so secure, so encrypted, that not even Neuralink can touch it, Riley said, her eyes locked onto the map in front of her. It's going to take time, but we're not just going to be a whisper anymore. We'll be a force. But as they began their work in secrecy, doubts still haunted Riley. Who could she trust? They were operating in the shadows now, and in the dark, it was harder to distinguish who was really with them and who was hiding something. It had been 3 days since the attack, and already, rumors were swirling among the remaining Pulse supporters. People were scared, not just of Neuralink, but of the fractures within their own team. Riley could feel the tension rising. The air was thick with suspicion. We need to stop this division, Carmen said, as she and Riley reviewed the encrypted codes they were building for the new platform. We can't afford to be at each other's throats. Riley nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. Carmen was right. They needed unity. But how could they trust each other when their entire world had been built on lies and betrayal? I know, Riley replied softly. But every time we try to move forward, something pulls us back. I can feel the strain in all of us. It's like we're already broken. It was then that Jules came in, his face grim, his eyes flickering with an emotion Riley couldn't quite place. We've got a problem, he said. His voice was tight. There's a leak. I don't know who, but someone is feeding Neuralink our movements. Riley's heart sank. The walls that had been put up to protect them were quickly crumbling again. How do you know? She asked, her voice edged with panic. The last safe house was compromised, Jules said, his jaw set. Neuralink is one step ahead of us. Every time we think we've secured a place, they're already there. Riley closed her eyes, feeling the weight of their situation crash down on her. It was a cold realization, they were running out of options. But running wasn't the answer. Not anymore. We'll stop this leak, Riley said, a new resolve hardening her words. We'll find the traitor, and we'll end it. But we don't stop building. We can't. Pulse isn't dead. It's just, evolving. The team began to work more covertly. They used encrypted messaging systems that were almost impossible to crack. They created phantom accounts and false leads to misdirect any enemies that might be watching. And while they worked, Riley's mind stayed focused on the bigger picture, Phoenix. What we're building here, she said to her team, isn't just a platform. It's a movement. A global network of people who are no longer afraid to be themselves. We've seen the power of connection, and now we make it invulnerable. We build from scratch, and we make it unstoppable. It wasn't just a platform they were building anymore. It was a sanctuary, a safe space for anyone who had been oppressed, anyone who had been silenced, anyone who had ever been told that they didn't belong. Riley didn't just want Pulse to be a rallying cry. She wanted it to be a lifetime commitment. But even as she spoke with fire, a nagging doubt still gnawed at the back of her mind. Could they really pull it off? Days turned into weeks. Riley and her team worked tirelessly, coding, building, testing, all in secret. Every move they made was done in the dark, as if they were ghosts in a machine. The world was still reeling from Pulse's first broadcast, and Neuralink's counteroffensive was relentless. But Riley's faith never wavered. She believed in the message. She believed in Pulse. And as their new platform, Phoenix, began to take shape, she knew it wasn't just a second chance. It was their rebirth. The fight for freedom wasn't over. It was only just beginning. But their struggles weren't over. The mole was still out there, and Riley's trust in the people closest to her was growing thinner by the day. As Phoenix neared completion, a new question arose: how far would they go to protect the revolution, and each other? The air inside the safe house was thick with unease. The work on Phoenix was advancing, but so was the fear of betrayal. Every click of the keyboard, every whispered conversation, felt like it could be the one that exposed the traitor within their ranks. Riley's mind raced constantly. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her, waiting for the right moment to strike. It was maddening. The very people she had trusted with her life were now suspects in a game she didn't want to play. It was early morning when Riley called an emergency meeting. The team gathered in the dimly lit basement of their new hideout, their faces weary, but determined. The scent of stale coffee lingered in the air, mixing with the tension that had become their constant companion. "We're not moving forward until we address this," Riley said, her voice steely, cutting through the murmur of the room. "Someone is leaking our plans. Someone is working with Neuralink." Her gaze swept over the group. Lex, Carmen, Jules, each of them had been part of Pulse from the beginning. She had trusted them, fought beside them, shared moments of hope and despair. And now, every one of them was a suspect. Carmen crossed her arms, her brow furrowed. "You think it's one of us?" she asked, her voice tight with suspicion. Riley hesitated, the weight of the accusation heavy in the air. She didn't want to believe it. "Not yet. I don't know. But something isn't right. We need to find out who, before they do any more damage." The silence that followed was suffocating. No one spoke for a long moment. They all felt it, the pressure to find the traitor, but also the dread of what it would mean for the team if they did. Could they survive this fracture? Jules broke the silence, his tone laced with frustration. "We've been through hell together," he said, his eyes scanning the faces of the group. "We've bled for this cause, and now we're going to turn on each other. Whoever's leaking our movements isn't worth keeping around. We find them, and we handle it. But we move forward." Riley nodded. Jules was right. They couldn't afford to dwell on the betrayal. Not now. If the mole was still inside, they had to act fast, but with the same precision that had guided them in their earlier successes. They couldn't let fear take control. "We're going to take a two-pronged approach," Riley decided, her voice regaining its steadiness. "We'll go through every piece of data we have, messages, server logs, anything. We'll find the gaps. And at the same time, we'll start testing loyalty. It won't be easy, but it has to be done." They spent the next few hours in silence, the only sounds the frantic typing of their keyboards as they sifted through mountains of data. Riley felt the weight of the task crushing down on her, but she knew it had to be done. The longer they waited, the more vulnerable they became. "I think I found something," Lex called from his station. He sounded urgent, his voice breaking through the silence. Riley moved to his side, her heart racing. "What is it?" she asked, leaning over his shoulder. He pulled up a series of encrypted messages, carefully hidden among layers of code. Riley stared at the screen, her eyes scanning the lines of text. There, buried in the system logs, was a string of messages that no one on their team should have seen. "This looks like someone was accessing our secure channels," Lex said. "It's a backdoor. A deliberate breach." Riley's stomach twisted. The mole had been watching their every move, making sure they couldn't get ahead. But who? Who had the skill and the audacity to go this far? "Do you know who did this?" Riley asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lex frowned, typing furiously. After a few moments, his eyes widened. "It's coming from within our internal network," he said. "But the source, it's not direct. It's hidden behind a proxy. They're trying to cover their tracks." Riley's frustration boiled over. This wasn't just a leak. This was a calculated attack. The mole wasn't just betraying them. They were sabotaging everything they had worked for. It was time for a decision. Riley couldn't waste any more time waiting for the mole to reveal themselves. She couldn't rely on anyone to volunteer the truth. They had to act, and fast. "We're going to conduct a full internal investigation," Riley announced to the team, her eyes hardening with resolve. "Anyone who has access to our network is a suspect. I'm going to need you all to help me sort through this, carefully. She paused, making sure every one of them understood the gravity of the situation. Trust is fragile right now, she said. But we need to focus on what comes next. We can't afford any more leaks. I want to know everything, every contact, every meeting, every person you've been in touch with. No exceptions. Riley's eyes scanned the room one last time, locking onto each member of her team. She needed them to understand. The moment we identify the mole, we'll move. But until then, we stay focused. We don't let Neuralink win. As the investigation continued, Riley couldn't help but feel the toll it was taking on her. Every passing hour seemed to wear away at her resolve. The internal strife within Pulse was growing more intense by the minute. Who could she trust? The hours stretched into days as the team sifted through every scrap of information, trying to uncover any hint of who the mole might be. They combed through data logs, cross-checked messages, and set traps to test each person's loyalty. But no matter how hard Riley tried, she couldn't shake the growing doubt in her chest. The longer this went on, the harder it became to distinguish between friend and foe. Late one night, as Riley sat alone in front of her laptop, a new message popped up in her inbox, an anonymous tip. The message was simple, but its implications were anything but. Look closer at Jules. Riley stared at the message, her heart pounding in her chest. Was it true? Could Jules be the traitor? She couldn't afford to trust anyone, but how could she ever suspect him? Riley's pulse raced as she stared at the anonymous message on her screen. Look closer at Jules. Her breath caught in her throat. The room was still, the only sound the soft hum of computers in the background. The weight of the accusation gnawed at her. Jules, one of her closest friends, one of the first members of Pulse. Could it really be him? Riley shook her head. It couldn't be. She didn't want to believe it. But what if the message was right? She had always trusted Jules. But trust was a fragile thing, and now it felt like glass, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. She knew what she had to do. Jules, she said, her voice steady, but her hands clenched at her sides. She stood at the door of his makeshift workspace, where he had been working tirelessly to help them rebuild. He looked up at her, his face tired but focused. We need to talk, Riley said, trying to keep her emotions in check. Now. Jules gave her a quizzical look but didn't argue. He pushed away from his desk, running a hand through his messy hair. What's going on? He asked, his voice calm but with an undercurrent of confusion. Riley walked into the room and closed the door behind her. There was no turning back now. The walls felt like they were closing in as she gathered her thoughts. I've been looking through the logs. There's a leak, she started, her voice strained. We've traced it back to someone inside this team. Jules raised an eyebrow, but his expression didn't shift. He seemed calm. Too calm. I don't know what you're talking about, he replied, his tone even. You're accusing one of us of being a mole. Riley narrowed her eyes, trying to read him, but the uncertainty gnawed at her gut. She'd never suspected him before. Jules had always been the one she turned to for advice, for support. But now, there was a gnawing doubt she couldn't shake. I don't know, Riley said quietly. But I'm getting anonymous tips, Jules. And they're pointing at you. Jules's eyes flickered, just for a split second, but Riley saw it. A flash of something, guilt. She didn't know. But it was enough to make her heart race. Are you saying you think I've betrayed us? Jules asked, his voice laced with disbelief. After everything we've been through? After everything I've done for Pulse? Riley took a step closer to him, trying to keep her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. I'm not accusing you, she said, though her tone betrayed the tension building inside her. But the facts don't lie. Someone on this team is working against us, and we need to know who. Jules hesitated, the smallest flicker of doubt crossing his face, but he quickly masked it with a smirk. "I'm here to help us win, Riley," he said, his voice low and measured. "You think I'd betray you all? After everything we've fought for?" Riley swallowed hard. The word seemed genuine, but something about his demeanor felt off. She was searching for the truth, but it was buried under layers of uncertainty. "Then help me," she said, her voice sharp now. "Help me find the mole. Help me stop this before we lose everything." Jules remained silent, his gaze shifting away from her. Riley watched him carefully, every second feeling like an eternity. "You've always been good at fixing things," she added, her tone almost pleading. "We need you." There was a long pause. Jules exhaled slowly and met her eyes again, but this time, something had changed. His expression was colder, distant. "You don't trust me anymore, do you?" he asked quietly. Riley recoiled. The question was a blow to her gut. No, she didn't want to lose him. She didn't want to believe he could betray them. "I don't know what to believe anymore," Riley whispered, her voice faltering. "Everything is falling apart." Jules stood up straighter, his hands clenching into fists. "This is ridiculous," he muttered under his breath. "I've been with you from the start, Riley. I've sacrificed everything. And now you're accusing me of being the traitor?" Riley shook her head. No. She couldn't let this spiral further. The truth had to come out, and she had to do whatever it took to protect the team, even if that meant confronting the harshest realities. "I'm not accusing you. I'm just trying to figure out who's behind this," she said, trying to remain calm. "And if you're not the mole, you should have nothing to hide." Jules paused, his jaw clenching. For a moment, there was only silence between them, a silence that felt deafening. Then, almost too quickly, he turned and walked to the door, opening it without another word. "I have nothing to prove to you," he said, his voice low and tight. "If you want to chase ghosts, go ahead. But don't expect me to be part of it." And with that, he left, leaving Riley standing in the middle of the room, her heart pounding in her chest. Riley stood there for what felt like an eternity, the tension in the air so thick she could almost taste it. Was it him? Was Jules the mole? But even as the doubt gnawed at her, another thought lingered: what if he was being set up? What if someone else was playing both sides, manipulating them all? Jules's behavior weighed heavily on Riley. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, but the truth seemed elusive. She needed to get answers, but as she sat down to review the logs again, a new message popped up on her screen. This time, it was from an unfamiliar account, and it was simple. "You're looking in the wrong place." Riley stared at the screen, her heart racing again. Who was playing this game? Who could she trust? That night, Riley barely slept. The weight of the decision she had to make pressed down on her like an anchor. Her mind kept replaying Jules's words, his expressions, the flicker of hesitation in his eyes, the coldness in his voice. She couldn't ignore it, but could she believe the worst? In the end, Riley knew what she had to do. She couldn't let Pulse fall apart. The team needed her to keep them united. And that meant digging deeper, even when it meant confronting the people she cared about. The silence of the safe house was suffocating. Riley sat at her desk, the glow of her computer screen illuminating her exhausted face as she reviewed the data yet again. She had spent the last several hours sifting through logs, cross-referencing names, searching for the elusive mole who had infiltrated Pulse. But there was something else now. Doubt. Could she trust Jules? Was he truly the traitor, or was this all part of a bigger game being played by someone else? The message from the anonymous account still burned in her mind: "You're looking in the wrong place." The more Riley thought about it, the more she realized something: the mole wasn't just manipulating her. They were manipulating everyone. She couldn't afford to wait anymore. It was time to take the gloves off. Riley had always prided herself on her intuition. But right now, her gut was twisted in knots. She couldn't afford to make another mistake. And yet, there was a gnawing suspicion in the pit of her stomach. What if the mole wasn't even part of the team? No, that's insane, she muttered to herself, shaking her head. It has to be someone inside. She paused, staring at the log files in front of her. The same name kept popping up. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidence. But it wasn't Jules. It wasn't Lex, Carmen, or anyone she had already considered. The name, Carla, was buried deep in the server records, linked to a handful of encrypted messages. Carla. Riley had never suspected her before. The young hacker had only joined Pulse a few months ago, but she had quickly proven herself invaluable. She was brilliant, resourceful, and had an almost uncanny ability to crack difficult systems. But she also had a reputation for keeping to herself, a trait that Riley had dismissed as part of her introverted nature. Now, Riley's thoughts were racing. Carla had been working remotely for a while, spending long hours in her own space, away from the rest of the team. It was easy to overlook her, to assume that she was just doing what needed to be done. But the patterns in the data logs didn't lie. Riley took a deep breath, gathering her resolve. If she was going to uncover the truth, she had to confront the situation head-on, no matter where it led her. It was late, and the rest of the team was scattered throughout the house, working on various tasks. Riley grabbed her tablet and typed a quick message to Carla. Need to talk. Urgent. Meet me in the control room. A minute later, Carla responded with a simple acknowledgement. Riley's heart was pounding as she made her way to the control room. She couldn't shake the feeling that the next few hours would change everything. What if Carla was the mole? What would that mean for Pulse? What would it mean for Riley? The door creaked open, and Carla was already sitting in front of the control panel, her eyes glued to the screen. What's up? Carla asked, her tone casual, but Riley could see the tension in her posture. Riley took a deep breath, walking into the room and closing the door behind her. There was no more dancing around this. It was time to get answers. I need to ask you something, Carla, Riley began, her voice steady but firm. I've been going through the logs, and I've found something I can't ignore. Your name keeps coming up in connection with the leaks. Carla froze, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. For a moment, there was no sound in the room except for the soft hum of the machines. Riley watched as Carla's face went from neutral to something unreadable. What do you mean? Carla asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Riley took another step closer, the tension palpable. I mean that someone's been feeding information to Neuralink. And the trail leads back to you. Carla swallowed, her eyes shifting nervously. Riley didn't blink, her gaze locked on the young hacker. I don't know what you're talking about, Carla said, but there was an edge to her voice now. Riley took another step forward, forcing Carla to meet her eyes. Don't lie to me, Riley said, her voice cold. The data doesn't lie. I'm giving you a chance here. Tell me the truth. Carla's face paled. The quiet confidence she had shown earlier was gone, replaced by panic. I haven't. I haven't done anything wrong, she stammered, shaking her head. I'm not the mole, Riley. I swear. Riley studied her face closely. Was this the panic of a guilty person, or was it the desperation of someone being framed? Then explain this, Riley said, pushing the tablet toward her, showing the encrypted messages tied to Carla's name. Why is your name attached to all of this? Carla's hands trembled as she glanced at the screen, her breath hitching in her chest. For a long moment, she was silent, her eyes scanning the messages, her mind clearly racing. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't want this. I never wanted this. Riley leaned forward, her heart pounding. What are you talking about? What's going on, Carla? Carla looked up, her eyes filled with tears. I've been forced into this. I didn't have a choice. Neuralink, they threatened me. They said they would destroy everything I've worked for, my family, if I didn't cooperate. Riley's stomach dropped. Threats. It was always the same, the price of defection. So you've been working with them? Riley asked, her voice barely a whisper. Carla nodded, her tears spilling over. I never wanted to betray you, Riley. I didn't know how to say no. I tried to get out, but they're watching me. I didn't know who else to turn to. Riley felt her heart twist. She wanted to feel anger, to feel betrayed. But instead, she felt pity. Carla wasn't the mole out of loyalty to Neuralink, she was the victim of manipulation and threats, caught in a web she couldn't escape. You need to fix this, Riley said softly. Help us take them down. It's the only way to save yourself. Carla nodded, wiping her eyes. I will. I swear I will. As Riley turned to leave, the weight of the truth settled on her shoulders. The mole wasn't a traitor for personal gain, but someone caught between two worlds. The betrayal stung, but the possibility of redemption was now within reach. Now, Pulse had to make a choice, and the war was about to get a lot more dangerous. The air inside the control room was thick with tension. Riley stood at the head of the table, the weight of what had just transpired pressing down on her shoulders. Carla, the very person they had trusted to help them crack codes and secure their communications, had betrayed them, though not out of malice. The hacker had been coerced by Neuralink, her family threatened, her life held in the balance. Riley ran a hand through her hair, trying to process everything. She had always been a strategist, calculating her moves with precision, but this felt different. Carla wasn't the enemy, but she was caught in the crossfire of a war they weren't fully prepared for. And now Pulse had to face the consequences. The team had gathered in the control room, the heavy silence broken only by the hum of the machines. They all knew something was wrong, and now, they knew the truth. Neuralink had found a way to get to Pulse from within. Carmen was the first to speak, her voice tight with frustration. How could we have missed this? Carla's been with us for months. We should have seen something. Riley sighed, stepping forward. She met Carmen's eyes, the sorrow in her own visible. It wasn't her fault. She didn't want to betray us. She was forced into it. Neuralink threatened her, her family. Lex, who had been silently staring at the floor, finally lifted his gaze. His eyes were hard, but there was something else behind them, a flicker of regret. But that doesn't change what happened, Riley. Carla still put us all at risk. She's been feeding them intel. Riley nodded, feeling the sting of the accusation. She knew Lex was right. The truth was painful, but it was the reality they had to confront. She didn't have a choice, Riley said quietly, her voice soft but firm. But we still have to make a decision about what to do next. Neuralink is coming for us, and they won't stop until they've wiped us out. There was a pause as the team processed this new revelation. The air felt heavier now, the stakes higher. They were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting for their very existence. So what do we do? Carmen asked, her tone tinged with anger but also fear. Do we trust her? Do we bring her back into the fold? Riley looked around the room at her team. She had led them through countless battles before, but this was different. Their unity had been shaken, the foundation of trust cracked. Could she ask them to forgive Carla? Was it even possible to move forward after what had happened? We don't have a choice, Riley said, her voice steady. We need her. We need everyone who's willing to fight. Carla has information that can help us bring Neuralink down. There was a murmur of agreement, but also hesitation. The wounds were fresh, and not everyone was willing to forgive just yet. Riley understood that. She had to make this decision, not just for the team, but for the cause they all believed in. Pulse was more than just a group of individuals. It was a movement, a fight for freedom and independence. And no matter the cost, she wouldn't let that fall apart. We bring Carla back in, but she's on probation, Riley added, her voice hardening. She has to prove her loyalty. If she's willing to fight for us, then we'll fight for her. Lex crossed his arms, clearly conflicted. And if she betrays us again? Riley didn't flinch. Then we deal with it. But right now, we need every resource, every ally. Neuralink is closing in. We don't have time for second-guessing. There was a moment of silence before Carmen spoke again, her voice softer this time. What's the next move, Riley? What do we do now? Riley exhaled, looking out at the team. This was the turning point. The battle for Pulsa's survival was no longer just about defense, they were going on the offensive. We go after Neuralink's Central Command, Riley said, her words cutting through the tension like a knife. We take the fight to them. If we cripple their operations, we cripple their ability to keep targeting us. No more hiding. No more waiting for them to make the first move. The room was quiet for a moment. Then, Lex spoke, his voice filled with resolve. We've been running long enough. Let's make this count. The team nodded, their faces hardening with determination. This was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a fight to reclaim everything they had lost, and to make sure that no one else would suffer like Carla had. The plan was set. Riley couldn't afford to waste any more time. They would move quickly, hitting Neuralink's supply lines and communication centers, disrupting their infrastructure. But they knew that would only be the beginning. Neuralink wasn't just a corporation, it was an empire with its roots deep in the heart of the technological world. They had to strike at the core. We'll hit them where it hurts, Riley said, a fire igniting in her chest. But we can't do it alone. We'll need allies. Carla was sitting in the corner, her head down, barely making eye contact with anyone. She had been silent since their conversation earlier, and Riley knew that the weight of what she had done was still heavy on her shoulders. But now wasn't the time for questions about loyalty. Now was the time for action. Riley walked over to her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. Carla, Riley said softly. Are you in? Carla looked up, her eyes red from tears. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm in. I'll do whatever it takes. Riley gave her a small, reassuring nod. They had a long road ahead of them. But with every second that passed, the enemy was closing in. And the consequences of failure were too great to ignore. Outside, the world was quiet. But within the walls of Pulsa's safe house, everything was about to change. The battle had just begun. The countdown was ticking, and the world felt as though it was holding its breath. Pulse had spent weeks preparing for this moment. Every resource they had, every ally they'd gathered, and every sacrifice they'd made had led them to this final push. Neuralink had underestimated them. They'd thought Pulse was just a group of hackers, isolated and weak. But now, the tide was turning, and Pulse was about to strike back harder than ever before. Riley stood in the heart of the control room, her eyes focused on the screen in front of her. The maps, the satellite feeds, and the schematics of Neuralink's Central Command were all laid out in front of her. The plan had been set in motion, and now there was no turning back. Everything's in place, Lex said, standing beside her. He had been quiet for the past few days, his mind preoccupied with the strategy. But now, there was a sense of calm in his voice. Riley nodded. The weight of the decision still sat heavy on her chest. This wasn't just a raid, this was their last chance to end the war. It was their final shot at taking down Neuralink and dismantling their empire for good. If they failed, there would be no Pulse. There would be no future. We go in hard, we go in fast, Riley said, her voice steely. We hit them at the core, destroy their infrastructure, and leave nothing for them to rebuild on. No second chances. Carla stood across the room, her face drawn and tired. She had been working tirelessly alongside the team, her skills crucial in pinpointing the vulnerabilities in Neuralink's systems. Despite her earlier betrayal, Riley could see the sincerity in her eyes now. Carla was fighting for something bigger than herself. "Are you ready?" Riley asked, her eyes meeting Carla's. Carla hesitated for a moment, then nodded firmly. "I'm ready. We're taking them down." The team gathered, their faces set with determination. This was it, the final assault. They had been up against a monstrous opponent, one that controlled not just the world's technology, but its future. But Pulse had one thing that Neuralink could never replicate, their will to fight. "Everyone, positions," Riley called, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. Lex, Carmen, and Carla moved swiftly to their designated spots. The plan was simple but risky. They would infiltrate Neuralink's headquarters using a combination of physical and cyber attacks. Lex and Carmen would handle the ground assault, while Riley and Carla would focus on the digital strike, disabling Neuralink's servers and communication systems. They had one shot at this, and if they faltered, it would be game over. Riley's hand hovered over the activation button. The next few hours would decide the fate of not just Pulse, but the entire world. Neuralink had been using their power to control minds, to create an artificial reality that had the potential to enslave humanity. But Pulse had the chance to shatter that dream, to return freedom to the people. She looked over at Carla one last time, her heart heavy with the burden of trust. Despite everything that had happened, despite the betrayal, Carla was here now, fighting alongside them. She was part of the team again. But this time, Riley wasn't just trusting Carla with their success, she was trusting her with their survival. "Let's do this," Riley said quietly, her finger pressing down on the button. The assault was swift and brutal. On the ground, Lex and Carmen led the charge. Armed with pulse rifles and backed by the best equipment Pulse had, they stormed Neuralink's headquarters with a precision that surprised even their enemies. Every hallway they passed was cleared in seconds, every security measure hacked or bypassed. They were unstoppable. "Move, move, move." Lex shouted over the comms, his voice fierce as he led the charge through the compound. Carmen was right behind him, her weapons at the ready, her eyes scanning for any sign of danger. Despite the chaos unfolding around them, she maintained her focus, each movement calculated, every shot deadly. But it wasn't just the ground assault that was making an impact. Riley and Carla were already deep within Neuralink's mainframe, their fingers flying over keyboards, working in perfect synchronization. "We're in," Carla said, her voice calm despite the pressure. She pulled up the main control panel on her screen, the code flashing before her eyes. Riley could feel the sweat on her palms as she watched the progress bar fill. They were so close. Neuralink's entire digital infrastructure was just a few keystrokes away from being obliterated. But they weren't just fighting against the clock. They were fighting against the most powerful technological empire in the world, one that wouldn't go down without a fight. Suddenly, the room flickered. The lights dimmed, then brightened again. "They're on to us," Carla exclaimed. "They've triggered the secondary defenses." Riley cursed under her breath. Neuralink had anticipated their move. The system was fighting back with everything it had, attempting to lock them out, destroy the data, and trigger countermeasures. They had seconds before Neuralink could completely erase their access. Come on," Riley muttered, her fingers moving faster. "We can't let them win." Carla was right beside her, her focus unwavering. "Almost there," Carla said, a flicker of hope in her voice. "We just need to break the last firewall." But the seconds were ticking away faster now. The countdown clock had started, and the team on the ground was reporting heavy resistance. Lex's voice crackled through the comms. "Riley, we're almost there, but we need backup. They've sent reinforcements." Riley clenched her jaw. They had to finish this, now. "Carla, you have to finish it. I'll handle the ground team." Without another word, Riley bolted out of the room, leaving Carla to do what only she could do. As Riley ran down the hallway toward the main compound, the roar of gunfire filled the air, but she kept moving forward. This was it. The end game. And as she burst through the doors to join Lex and Carmen, the world shifted. The digital systems fell silent. The last of Neuralink's defenses crumbled under Carla's expert touch. The battle was over. Minutes later, Pulse stood victorious. The compound was in ruins, but the enemy had been defeated. Neuralink's operations had been crippled. The world would never be the same again. Riley watched her team, her family, standing together, battered but unbroken. The world was free. But as she looked at Carla, she knew there was still a price to be paid for the freedom they'd won. Trust had been broken, but in the end, they had all found a way to rebuild. And as they looked toward the future, they knew one thing: the fight was over, but the journey had only just begun. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?